here this morning with Congresswoman Martha Roby of the 2nd District. Thank you for having us today.
Thank you for being here.
We are interested in finding out what's going on up in Washington from your perspective. I know you've been involved in a lot of the latest battles and things that are going on there, one of which is the budget that was passed recently. Would you like to speak a little bit about that this morning?
Sure. I was happy to cast a vote in favor of our chairman, Paul Ryan's budget. It is a brave and courageous budget that does cut spending, reduces our deficit, and begins to pay down our debt for the first time since World War II. It does so in a way that protects our seniors and cuts out wasteful spending. So I'm happy to have supported the budget. The discretionary spending cap was actually less than the Budget Control Act, which is the current law that we're under. And you know, the Senate hasn't passed a budget in over 1,000 days. So it is our hope that Mr. Reid will step up to the plate and actually allow for the Senate to debate and potentially pass the budget. Although I'm not holding my breath. The President is running against the Republican Congress, and as you know, we do not hold the majority in the Senate.
Right.
I believe that there's been a clear understanding between the President and Mr. Reid to not do much of anything between now and the election. And it's a shame because there's so many millions of Americans that are still out of work, and energy prices continue to soar, and we need leadership right now. But this budget is that. It's a leadership in the right direction to try to restore fiscal sanity back to this country so that it can be great.
Well, and one of the things that we see here, of course, Alabama is suffering from its own trickle-down budget problems, depending on the federal government and such. But it is that type of leadership that people are looking for in solving the day-to-day problems. And really, isn't it the budget that comes out of Washington affects us so deeply here on the state and even local level?
It does, and it will. But just remember, the federal budget, the budget that we passed in the House, is basically just a roadmap. It's a blueprint for
Right.
how do we want to move forward in the next 10 years. And setting caps and on spending and doesn't really get down into the nitty-gritty and specifics. It's
Right.
through the appropriations process when we pass those bills through the House. Hopefully they pass through the Senate, and then there's some sort of conference report that ultimately determines how those tax dollars are spent. It's through the appropriations process that you really see the full impact onto the states when it comes to cutting back things like Medicaid, education dollars, whatever it may be. So we're at a place now where we need to prioritize spending. We need to look at whether or not there is a constitutional responsibility for the federal government to even fund some of these things. And it is creating a hardship for states and local governments.
But without the Senate actually passing a budget, there's no way to get to a conference and therefore get to appropriations and for the state to see what shape they would be in.
You know, it seems fairly commonsensical to the average American that sits around their breakfast room table and balances their checkbook and can only spend what they bring in. That's obviously not how the federal government works. And you know, you and I have discussed the Honest Budget Act.
Right.
that I was proud to introduce. It's the companion bill to Senator Sessions' Honest Budget Act in the Senate. The first budget gimmick that the Honest Budget Act attacks is if you don't have a budget, you can't appropriate money.
Right.
It seems fairly obvious, but to your point exactly is that we have to have a plan, a roadmap, a blueprint about how the federal government is going to spend hardworking Americans' tax dollars. And without that, we ought not to be able to appropriate money. What will happen is we will move forward in the appropriations process whether the Senate passes a budget or not. We'll just use our budget as the benchmark under which to work.
Your passion for this budget and your passion to cut the gimmicks, I think, sets a precedent we would like to see more among legislators across the board, whether they're Democrat or Republican, that they're working every day to see that fiscal responsibility starts in Washington, because we know like you said, at our homes, we can't spend more than we take in and hope to survive.
Right.
So it is important to have the passion. Just so we can let folks understand, how did you come by this sort of zeal for this, and what was your motivation?
Well, I've had a year, to really see how the process works and understand it was a pretty unprecedented year in light of the fact that you had such a historically large freshman class. So 87, then we had 2 special elections, so 89 freshmen Republicans that make up the new majority in the House of Representatives, some of which have no political background at all, or just business owners or moms that wanted to insert themselves in the political process. And we've had this opportunity to step back and say, through H.R. 1, which was the continuing resolution to fund the government for fiscal year 11, because Ms.
Right.
Pelosi never passed a budget. Then we went through the debt ceiling crisis. And through all of these pretty historic moments, we tried to cut spending. And what became painfully apparent is that savings we were accounting for actually weren't real savings in some instances. They were cuts in mandatory spending, dollars that would have never been spent in the first place. We account for those as savings, and then we go spend the money as deficit spending.
Right.
These are institutionalized gimmicks used by both Republicans and Democrats. And so having had the opportunity to see that, and then the benefit of Senator Sessions' bill,
Right.
to really look at that and say, okay, how can we apply that in the House of Representatives and say to both Republicans and Democrats, enough is enough. This is not how you, the individual in your home, balances your checkbook, or how you sustain a business in the United States of America. And so the federal government should be held to the same standard, and it's what I hear everywhere I go. And so this bill is not the answer to all of our fiscal problems, but it certainly is a start in moving us in the right direction.
One of the things we've noticed about your career so far, and it seems, when you say it the first year, it seems short, but it does seem like you've been there for a lot of historic moments, and not all of them pleasant, for sure, many of them terrible, but that you brought to this a common sense approach and a willingness to look at it long term and not say, well, let's fix the immediate problem and we'll kick the can down the road. You seem to look fairly long term.
Well, I tell people all the time, I'm 35 years old. I have a almost 7-year-old and a 3-year-old. I don't get to kick this can down the road. I don't get to kick it, punt. I get to carry this ball all the way to the end zone because I am 35,
Right.
and this is about my children's future in this country. And I think, if I could ever portray to the people who have elected me to represent them my sincerity and wanting to truly be a part of the solution. And look, we have fundamental problems that need to be fixed, and I don't believe Congress is going to be able to restore the faith with the people of this great nation until we actually do fix a fundamental problem.
Right.
But we've got to have political courage and the political will, both in the White House and in the bicameral Congress, not the Republican Congress, right?
Right.
And in order to do that. And so it's my hope as we move to the next election that the American people will really feel the need, the urgency to accomplish that.
I think, speaking of the next election, of course, Obamacare is on everyone's mind, and we can now officially call it Obamacare because the president has owned it and owned the name Obamacare. I know most people in Alabama are not in favor of the current legislation, and now that it's gone to the Supreme Court, there's lots of tea leaves to be read.
Okay.
But we don't know until they return in June and give us their opinion. Could you give us some of your thoughts today on the act itself and what you see as potential for the future?
Well, House Republicans have now voted 26 times to repeal the entire Obamacare or a portion thereof. Just last week, we voted to repeal the IPAB, which is the Independent Advisory Boards that would deal with Medicare reimbursement, rationing of health care for our seniors. So we have taken all the appropriate steps to represent the sentiment of the American people, which is a huge percentage of Americans, not just Alabamians, that do not agree with Obamacare. We can all agree that we need health care that's more affordable and more accessible. We just happen to believe that we shouldn't put the government standing between the doctor and the patient, that free market principles can drive down the cost. I wouldn't speculate on what the Supreme Court is going to do because, quite frankly, I just don't know. I think the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals offered a very comprehensive opinion. That is one of the reasons I think that the Supreme Court took the case to begin with. And the individual mandate is important that be struck down. What a terrible precedent to set that the Commerce Clause of the United States Constitution has such breadth that the federal government can mandate that you buy insurance. But more than that, I think the question that House Republicans have to be ready to answer in the majority is that if the individual mandate is struck down, does the entire house of cards fall? And if so, we better be waiting in the wings with a replacement bill that accomplishes the things that I've already stated. So, and we have that, and we're prepared for that, but the committees that have jurisdiction over health
Well, thank you for giving us this time today, and we look forward to hearing what
care need to be ready to jump on it as soon as the Supreme Court issues its opinion.
Well, there are plenty of people who see good things in bits and pieces of it, because I think there has been a failing in our health system. Maybe not failing is not the right word, but there needs to be a fix in some areas of health care, and everyone from our doctors to our patients are aware of that. And so I look forward to seeing what comes next as the American people do.
Well, again, we've laid out our agenda for health care that is reliant upon free market principles, to buy insurance across state lines, to drive down costs, high-risk pools for people that have pre-existing conditions, health savings accounts, which puts the responsibility, personal responsibility, back on the individual to make those decisions that are best for them. All of these things in a comprehensive way that can drive down costs and keep America's healthcare system, which, by the way, is the best in the world.
Well, thank you for giving us this time today, and we look forward to hearing what's happening next, and
thank you for
stay
having
in
me.
touch with you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.